Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul and hopefully you're having an amazing day. I want to begin this video by discussing the RX 6900. Is it a graphics card which exists but AMD have not yet disclosed? We know of course the 6800, 6800 XT and the 6900 XT, which is the highest end SKU that we know of in the RDNA 2 family, do exist of course. They've been confirmed officially by AMD. But the Euro-Asian Economic Commission website, which is a regulatory office, has actually had several filings from ASUS, and one of those is the RX 6900. Now, this particular filing is for a ROG Strix LC series of cards, and again, it's just listing it as the 6900. So there are several potential possibilities. The first possibility is that this is an unannounced graphics card from AMD, which, well, has simply been filed by ASUS. There are other possibles though. The first is that it's, well, a just-in-case filing by ASUS in case that AMD chooses to release a 6900. After all, there is a 6800 vanilla. I'm just going to use that just to make it clearer. And so it's possible that there will be a 6900, again, vanilla. But the other possibility is that it was made in error. In other words, someone in the office did an oopsie. After all, again, these things can happen. What we do know, of course, is that the custom 6800 series cards launches in a few days. It's November the 25th. And the reference 6900 XTs launch a couple of weeks later. They debut December the 8th. But we don't know the date for the custom designs of the RX 6900 XT. Given we're not going to see the reference designs until the 8th, it's possible that custom designs will not happen until some point Q1, of course, next year. The only head scratcher though is if the 6900 non-XT actually existed, I don't really understand what the spec difference would be compared to the 6800 XT. Because the 6900 XT features 80 compute units, which is the highest configuration again for RDNA 2. It's Narvo 21, the full die is 80 compute units. And then we see a cut down to 72 compute units for the 6800 XT. Honestly, it's not that big of a cut. You're just losing 8 CU. And then finally, you've got the 6800 vanilla, which cuts out yet another 12 compute units. So it's 80, 72, and 60. So there's a 20 CU difference between the 6900 XT and the 6800, with really the identical memory configuration between the two cards. The only real difference between them, other than the obvious thing, that is the number of compute units, is the clock frequency. So the 6900 XT can boost to 2250 MHz, which is the same as the 6800 XT, but the 6800 vanilla can just boost to 2100. So there's not that much room for AMD to kind of wrangle in a 6900 non-XT part. Keeping on the subject of AMD for just one more moment, I'd like to discuss the Ryzen 5 5500U and the Ryzen 7 5700U. So the 5500 is a 6-core 12-thread processor. Meanwhile, the 5700, as you can probably guess, is an 8-core 16-thread processor. And they are still based on the rumoured architecture, but they are quite interesting because they are codenamed Lucene. Again, these are still basically very similar to what we've seen previously from AMD, and honestly there's not that much of a difference. If you actually compare the 5700U, for example, to the 4700U, it's essentially the same chip. The only difference is that the clock frequencies have just simply been upped a little. You can really say that you could quite comfortably have called these chips a small incremental upgrade. You could have called them like the 4750Us or whatever, and it wouldn't have really been misplaced. Honestly, it seems that these names have been changed for a couple of reasons. Reason one, it gives OEMs, laptop manufacturers, and so on a new product to release. Like these refreshes obviously are quite important for partners. The second thing is it does help to create a naming scheme which further confuses customers. In case you can't tell, the last point was a bit sarcastic, as AMD had basically said previously that they wanted the 5000 series to be, well, basically Zen free. So what we have is, well, at least what we can tell here anyway, and this is again according to some rumors, these products are not officially released. But if you look at the 5700U, it's based on rumoured, and again 8 cores, 8 threads. But then you can have the 4800U, which is a 8 core 16 thread part. And then if you look at Lucene, which is Zen 2, it's the 5700U is 8 core 16 thread. But then you have Cezanne, which is based on Zen 3, and it's the 5800U. And videocards.com did a really good job of just kind of putting all of these together in a chart. And my personal opinion is I don't like this. I think it's quite confusing to the average customer. Like, if someone was telling you this and you weren't that familiar with AMD's products and you were just like listening to it, or you were trying to listen to a sales advisor, or just, imagine that you're not super up on like technology and you're just kind of looking at browsers, you're like, well, what the heck is the difference? So I think there will be a lot of confusion there. I think that naming schemes need to be a little better. But again, that's just my personal opinion. And now Nvidia and the RTX 3070 Ti. This card, it's interesting not just because of the specifications, but to the story which is the 3070 Ti. According to very well-known leaker CoPT7 Kimmy, again, pretty much everything they've said about Ampere up until now has been accurate, so I tend to listen to what they say. They said that originally the 3070 Ti was going to be built on the GA104-400 core, and then it was going to be based on GA102-150. But both of these are cancelled. And now the RTX 3070 Ti is going to be utilizing the Unicorn. It's going to use GA103-300A1. Now, this particular core, that is GA103, has been, again, a unicorn. We've been hearing an awful lot about it, but we haven't exactly known what product it's attributed to. We just know that it exists. Well, at least it's been one of those murmured cores that we have heard about for some time. It is apparently going to feature 7424 FP32 or CUDA cores if you prefer, and this is going to be combined with 320-bit bus, again using GDDR6, so we can probably guess that that's going to be 10 gigabytes of memory, so a very similar memory configuration to what we have with the RTX 3080, albeit with a fewer number of CUDA cores. Another possibility, and I'm stressing this as a guess, is that the bus width could also indicate 20 gigabytes of memory. Now, I don't know if Nvidia would do that, because that would mean that the 3070 Ti would then have 20 gigabytes of memory and the 3080 would only have 10, unless we're going to see a situation where Nvidia re-release a 3080 with more RAM, but honestly, I don't think that this is very likely, at least this year. I think that if Nvidia did do a refresh, it will be probably next year of the products, but who knows what the release timings for these things actually are. Oh, and one other thing regarding the RTX 30 series. Nvidia have recently had their third quarter earnings call with investors, and Colette Kress, who is the company's CFO, actually was describing the shortages of the GPUs. This is a transcription by Seeking Alpha. I'm going to read it verbatim. While we had anticipated strong demand, it exceeded even our bullish expectations. I'm sure some of you in the comments are going to change the bullish to something else. Given industry-wide capacity constraints and long cycle times, it may take more than a few months for product availability to catch up with demand, end quote. Also, Jensen Huang had said that the demand for these GPUs had been overwhelming, and Ampere was one of their fastest ramps ever. Now, I can say that from what I'm hearing from a couple of different people in the industry, a few things. First of all, RTX 20 demand was high-ish, but it wasn't as high as with the GTX 10 demand. The GTX 10 series, let's just be really honest, was damn impressive. The RTX 20 series, I thought ray tracing was cool, but there was no ray tracing games at launch. DLSS was cool, but again, there was no DLSS games on launch. The cards were more expensive, and traditional rasterization performance was faster. But if you had, let's say, a GTX 1080 or 1080 Ti, as 4K displays were not back then as standard as they are now, with a lot of TVs now having like VRR and of course 1440p monitors. They were common, but not as common as they are now. A lot of folks just simply were like, I'll wait, which did help to taper the demand just a little. But from what I understand, from multiple people now kind of digging a little bit, the demand for the 30 series was way higher. Like, I was asked to not give specific numbers, but it apparently was. It just dwarfed the 20 series in the first several days, and this is apparently why some sites crashed. And of course, we've also seen this trickle in to AMD as well. Although, honestly, both companies have obviously handled things, in their own ways, and I think it's fair to say that there is a ton of frustration at the moment because ultimately we're seeing these launches, but you can't get the cards, and it makes it very difficult to kind of anticipate, because it's like I know people literally have sold like their RX 5000 series GPU or the RTX 20 series GPU, and I know what people are going to say. Well, you shouldn't have sold the card because you don't know what the demand is going to be like. You don't know what the reviews are going to say. And I totally understand that point of view, but it's also a lot of money to cough up to buy like an RX 6000 GPU, like the 16800 XT, for example, or the RTX 3080. Like, yeah, they're a lot of money. So if you're waiting for a while, obviously you've just got that thing of you're watching the value of the GPU potentially just plummet. And so sometimes people had little choice. They just sold the card, and they're obviously waiting on whatever GPU they've got, kind of laying around. Like some people maybe they've borrowed like, I don't know, like a 970 from their friend or whatever they can do just to kind of get by. I mean, if you have an Intel system, it's not as bad. You can use the iGPU, but let's face it, it doesn't matter really. You're not going to be playing a game at like high refresh rate on an Intel iGPU. It's not impossible to play something like Counter-Strike on lower settings at lower resolution, but anything more demanding, not happening. So I do understand a lot of people's frustration. So I think that these shortages are unfortunately something we're going to have. You're just going to have to deal with them for some time. Microsoft doesn't believe that this constraint of the Xbox is going to end anytime soon either. They think it's going to be capacity constrained for a long time, certainly until the first, maybe second quarter of next year. They've just recently said that. Sony have said that all of their PlayStation 5 inventory has just sold out. And yeah, I do understand your frustration to people in the comments because it's frustrating for me as well, because ultimately, like, checking out the hardware is really fun, like covering the hardware. And even though I do get lucky, I'm very privileged and I get some stuff for free, and believe me, I feel incredibly privileged for that. But it's also it I want you guys to enjoy the products as well. It's that simple. Like I had to buy my consoles, and it was a sweating experience, just like crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. And currently, I'm in a queue to get like a 5900, and I don't know the date it's going to happen. And believe me, I do know what it's like to just be like hoping for the best to get the hardware. I don't think anyone's necessarily at fault, and I don't blame the companies, but I do understand a lot of people are facing a lot of frustration right now, especially with what's going on, especially if you had to sell your old kit to actually get this new stuff. Yeah, it just sucks. And obviously, Nvidia and all of these companies also are feeling it too, because let's face it, they want to sell you these products. I wasn't going to cover this, but I might as well since I'm talking about all graphics card stuff for AMD and Nvidia. Cyberpunk has actually had its system specifications revealed by CD Projekt Red. So this is how much you're actually going to require to run the game. You will notice that basically every system, other than the minimum spec, actually suggests that you have a storage device which is an SSD, and you're going to be paying 70 gigabytes for the privilege of installing this game. You can read the settings yourself. Unfortunately, they've only got the RT settings for Nvidia, so we don't know what you're going to need on the AMD equivalent. And you'll also notice that the CPUs you need are kind of anemic. Like, let's pick on let's go with the ray tracing offsetting, and let's say high. Actually, to be fair, both the high and the ultra are basically identical. You need like a 47 and 90, which is also the same even as the recommended. So if you look at the ray tracing ultra settings, again, it's not that much more. Like you could probably get away with it by simply overclocking your um, your 4790 a little bit, and you'd basically have the same performance as the 6700. And you can also make it do with a 3600. It's interesting they've done that. Like I would have thought that a 3600 would have like stomped a seven. Yeah, I would have thought it was stomped 6700. I'd like to test that actually. That's kind of interesting to me. Anyway, you will need an RTX 3080 or above to run this game with RT at Ultra. I'm going to make the assumption that that is utilizing DLSS. Again, I don't have the game to test that, but you would make the assumption that it would. To play 1440p Ultra, then you're going to need an RTX 3070. And if you don't give a crap about ray tracing and stuff, which I personally think looks gorgeous, but each to their own, you're going to need an RTX 3070. The minimum here is a 780. I would be curious to see what the difference is visually between the minimum spec and, let's say, recommended. So if you have a card like a 1060, you should be okay to play the game at high settings with the resolution of 1080p. And yeah, so the specs honestly are not as crazy as I expected. I half expected them to say ray tracing ultra with an RTX 3090 and the minimum CPU to be something like, I don't know, like a 3700X or maybe even more. Like I was half expecting that, but yeah, these specs are not quite as vicious as I was expecting, honestly. Finally, a couple of things for the consoles. The first of which is that there is a possibility that we will see a equivalent of Xbox Game Pass coming to the PlayStation. This is courtesy of TASS. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that or if it is a pronunciation. It's a Russian outlet anyway. And Jim Ryan, who is of course head honcho over at PlayStation, he said that they believe that competition is a really great thing. They don't like console wars. They think that consumer choice is amazing, which I personally totally agree with. I think that if we have great competition, it only benefits us as someone who is coughing up for the monies. And they said that there is news in regards to the question of an equivalent of Game Pass. He said, and I quote, "There is actually news to come on this, but not today. We have PlayStation Now, which is our subscription service, and that is available in a number of markets." And that was it. And it's kind of interesting because Sony in the past have not believed that Game Pass was something that they would do. They kind of made it seem like it wasn't sustainable. I believe they even used the word unsustainable, excuse me, because of the cost of developing games. Now, it's possible that what they will do, and I'm guessing this, I'm not saying this with any insider information, is we'll have certain games in Game Pass, so not necessarily day one releases. Example, let's say it exists right this second for the PlayStation 5. They would possibly have maybe the Uncharted of backwards compatible games. Maybe it would have Spider-Man remastered in there, but it wouldn't have Miles Morales and it wouldn't have Demon's Souls. That could be one way to go. And slightly older titles would essentially become part of this, and then newer games wouldn't. That would be possibly one route. And maybe this would tie up to games which would come to the PC, because we know Sony are making inroads for more of their games to come to the PC, so possibly that's what Sony will do. Again, this is a guess on my part. I'm just purely speculating. I'm not saying this with any insider information. Another thing as well is that uh, Jim Ryan also believes, this is, by the way, in the same interview as the one I mentioned earlier, he thinks that we won't see games which are really, well, defining to the next generation for a while. He's saying that it's probably going to be some point until late 2021, possibly even 2022. This actually fully tallies up with what a developer that was speaking to me and told me, and I actually reported this a while ago as an exclusive, that most likely it's going to be late 2021, 2022. One of the reasons behind this for the PlayStation is it's just getting to full grips with the geometry engine. Obviously, developers too for both the PlayStation and the Xbox need to rethink a lot of their graphics pipeline. They need to tweak the game engine and all of this stuff. And I will also, over the next day or so, I'll be releasing a new video which is going to be detailing the problems of Assassin's Creed on the Xbox Series X. I've actually got some answers for that. I've dug around and I've actually spoken to some developers. And yeah, it's not really the Xbox's fault. And it's not quite what many of you are thinking either with the tools. So I'll get into that in a video very soon. And I'm also going to be detailing some of the aspects of the PlayStation 5 as well as the Xbox, which have not actually been publicly released. So that's going to be in the next day or two. I'm working on another really big video at the moment. So I'm probably going to be finishing the editing for that tomorrow morning. And then I'm going to record this console related video. But so subscribe, obviously, if you are interested in that stuffs. But with that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video, the normal stuff. Like, share, comment and subscribe. And I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.